Situation here in Korea and a subsequent government briefing. I'm Noah Adam. It's great to have you with us. Now, the South Korean government has made it a goal to be as transparent as possible when providing information about COVID-19. And as part of those efforts, local government and health officials will be holding a briefing for the foreign press on the situation here in the country, as well as countermeasures. We have our Kim Da-mi at the Foreign Press Center, Korea, where the briefing should begin very shortly. Now, Tammy, this is the first briefing that the government is holding specifically for foreign journalists here in the country. Is that right?
Right, Adam. The South Korean government is taking a transparent approach to combating the COVID-19 outbreak. And today, they're keeping foreign journalists up to date with the situation here. Ever since the start of the outbreak, South Korea has been holding briefings twice a day. But today, at the briefing, government officials working on the crisis will be attending from a Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters, the Central Disease Control Headquarters, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They'll be briefing journalists on the coronavirus outbreak updates and on their response plans. The Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters will first brief reporters on how the government has been trying to tackle the virus and its future plans. Just like regular daily briefings, there'll also be the latest updates on the COVID-19 situation in Korea, including the number of confirmed cases and the quarantine measures. Also, the Foreign Ministry will clarify its stance on countries imposing entry restrictions against travelers from South Korea. South Korea has also been a world model for the speed and scope of its coronavirus diagnostic capability. For that, here at the briefing, the country's health authorities will also introduce the virus test kit that has allowed the country to carry a test on thousands of people each day. That's all from me, Adam.
Right, Tammy, thank you. And do stay safe while you're there at the Foreign Press Center. That was our Kim Da-mi reporting from the Foreign Press Center, Korea. We are just about minutes away from the government and local health officials from giving a press briefing to the foreign press. As we heard, it's the first such press briefing to global media outlets here in Korea. Just to give you an update on some numbers on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea, there are so far nearly 7,400 cases of COVID-19 in the country. The death toll is now standing at least 51. And out of the people giving the press briefing today, just to give you their names, we have Kim Gang-nip, the overall coordinator, who will begin the briefing, and we will connect to the Foreign Press Center, Korea, for the briefing. I think they are just about to start, and Arirang TV will be providing English interpretation for all our English-speaking viewers out there, and we are just moments away from the first speaker of the briefing to global media outlets.
Now we will begin our briefing. Good afternoon. I am from the PR department of the CDC. Now we will begin our briefing on the COVID-19 outbreak tailored for the foreign press. Today it will be participated by Kim Gang-nip, overall coordinator 1 of the Central Disease and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters. We also have Mr. Kwon Koo-chun-wook and Mr. Lee Tae-ho, the second Vice Foreign Minister. We also have from the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, including Ms. Oh Hyun-ju, as well as other medical experts who will be joining us today for the press briefing. And the briefing will be first be briefed by the Mr. Kim Gang-nip, who will be briefing on the KCDC measures on COVID-19 outbreak and future plans. Next, Mr. Kwon Jun-wook will talk about the quarantine measures, and it will be followed by Mr. Lee Tae-ho, who will be explaining about international diplomatic relations that Korea has in terms of COVID-19 outbreak, and will be followed by Q&A session. First, here is Mr. Kim Gang-nip. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Vice Minister of Welfare, and today a lot of you have joined today, so I would like to extend my greetings in English.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to this briefing, specially organized for the members of the international media. The briefing is very significant as it provides an opportunity to explain the current status of Korea's COVID-19 outbreak and our response to it. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Korea is not small. However, an important aspect of the situation is missed if we simply look at it in numerical terms. In fact, most of the COVID-19 patients are from a single cluster in a single region. Here in Korea, as you all know, COVID-19 infections spread rapidly within a certain religious organization known as the Shincheonji in Daegu. Geographically, therefore, the contagion is mainly concentrated within the city of Daegu and the immediate vicinity. Up until recently, the Korean government has devoted a tremendous amount of its medical testing capabilities on the Daegu area and on Shincheonji members. As a result, we've managed to identify and isolate most of the people who've been infected with the virus in the Daegu community in a short span of time. Moreover, we continue to monitor and control the spread of COVID-19 virus, conducting at least 10,000 diagnostic tests nationwide each day. Initially, the greater than expected rapidity and the scale of the contagion caused some confusion. But now, the situation is steadily coming under control. We are seeing success in our effort to stem the spread of this infectious disease. Of all the confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the country to date, 89% are confined to Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do province. And 95% of the cases, not counting those still under epidemiological investigation, have been linked to the Shincheonji religious community. As such, the COVID-19 spread in Korea, despite many cases, has been mainly confined to a single cluster in a single geographical region. This has facilitated the public health authorities' task of controlling the contagion. In a moment, I will explain what steps are being taken in great detail. For now, however, suffice it to say that Korea is creating a new system for responding to infectious diseases. The traditional response to an outbreak of contagious disease has stressed the importance of locking down afflicted area and isolating infected victims. Such an approach has had modest effectiveness, but it has such drawbacks as being close-minded, coercive, and inflexible. For these reasons, we have experienced harmful consequences, with democracy being undermined and active public participation in the process being reduced. Korea, as a democratic country, values globalization and a pluralistic society. Therefore, we believe we must transcend the limitation of the conventional approach to fighting infectious disease. For these reasons, Korea is adopting a different model for responding to contagious disease outbreaks. The key tenet of our model can be defined as a dynamic response system for open democratic societies. In this regard, we consider two core values to be important. The first is that public participation must be secured through openness and transparency. The second is to respect creative thinking and use cutting-edge technology to develop the most effective means of responses. Korea's Contagious Disease Response Program that I'm now going to introduce has the following characteristics. First, information is disclosed transparently and rapidly. The government is working on various ways to ensure that the information that citizens need to stay safe include detailed explanations. For example, the travel histories of confirmed patients are being made public and briefings are being conducted twice a day. The more transparently and quickly accurate information is provided, the more the people will trust the government. They will act rationally for the good of the community at large. Second, many citizens have respect on open democracy and community spirit, are voluntarily taking part in the COVID-19 response effort. With individuals maintaining good hygiene and giving others ample spaces as part of social distancing, the same preventive effect that would have been expected from a physical lockdown have been achieved. This way, openness is maintained as people can avoid the intrusions on their daily lives that would be imposed by mandatory lockdowns. In the interest of community awareness, the government is covering the financial cost for related testing and treatment instead of saddling individuals with those expenses. The government is also reimbursing medical facilities for losses incurred from imposed quarantines. Third, we are seeking creative solutions, and we are making full use of advanced information technology in this regard. We have come up with some world-class best practices in our fight against the disease. These include drive-through testing stations and epidemiological investigations supported by GPS data. These actions have been a big help in allowing us to maintain an open society while effectively preventing further spread of the disease. Fourth, we are conducting more diagnostic testing faster than any other country in the world. Korea is capable of processing up to 15,000 diagnostic tests a day, and the aggregate number has reached 190,000 already. If medical doctors suspect a COVID-19 case, they can proceed with testing without restriction. Of course, the testing is conducted free of charge. The enormous testing capability allows us to identify patients early and minimize the harmful effect. Indeed, this is the most important means of fending off a contagious disease outbreak. Ironically, the large numbers of confirmed cases in Korea has enabled us to prove our excellent ability to fight the virus. These include our superb diagnostic testing capabilities and thorough epidemiological investigation. Finally, our highly trained, outstanding medical professionals and our top-notch medical institutions are devoted to the task at hand with a sense of mission. The Korean government through the process of responding to COVID-19 outbreak, is convinced that our model is working effectively. We are now confident that we will overcome COVID-19 while minimizing damage. Those infected with COVID-19 suffer cold-like symptoms. It is highly contagious from the start, and the rate of spread is rapid. Such characteristics render the traditional response to contagious disease ineffective, which stresses the needs for physical lockdown and isolation. That simply delays the timing of the initial entry and subsequently makes blocking the spread difficult. With a transparent and open society as the goal, we recommend a response system that blends voluntary public participation with creative application of advanced technology. The world now faces a common threat, COVID-19. Close collaboration through solidarity will enable us to defeat our common enemy. Korea, as a member of the global community, will share our experience and knowledge with the rest of the world. I'd like today's event to be of assistance to other countries who are confronting this issue. Thank you. 감사합니다.
So next, we will have the Deputy Director General of CDC, Kwon Junuk, explaining the rest. So could you come up to the podium? So, hello, I am Kwon Junuk, the Vice Head of the CDC HQ. So in Korea, related to the COVID-19, I'll be explaining about the countermeasures happening in Korea. So first, this is the first slide of the PowerPoint presentation that was prepared. So if you take a look at it, around December 30th of last year, the China National Health Commission has announced and made a report about a pneumonia of unknown origin. And on January 3rd of 2020, we raised up the alert level to blue in Korea. And on January 19th of 2020, there was a first confirmed case in Korea. And at that time, it was a female patient aged 35 years old and of the Chinese national. And she has been discharged. And on January 20th, it has been raised up to the alert level to yellow. And then the alert level has been raised up to level 3 afterwards. And then we saw cases of the confirmed cases coming in from overseas. So, and on January 30th and 31st, we found secondary infection and tertiary infection cases. And on January 30th, WHO declared the PHEIC of COVID-19. And although it's not indicated here, on February 4th, there has been an entry ban from people coming in from the Hubei province. And on February 12th, excluding the Hubei province, the regions for the entry ban has been expanded to include Hong Kong and Macau. And also we saw some big cluster occurrences on February 19th, focusing on Shincheonji, and the alert level has been raised to the highest level, red, on February 23rd. Now going on to the next slide. So if you look at the total number of confirmed cases, So we have the daily statistics being confirmed, and we are actually informing of it as of midnight of the day. And as of the midnight of March 9th, we have seen cases amounting to 7,382. And most recently, today, we saw an increase by 248. And among these, there has been 166 people who has been discharged. And the 31st patient incurred on February 21st, and we saw some fragmented cases coming in from overseas, and then we saw a dramatic increase by late February. And next page. So this is by age groups and the death distribution. So if you look on the left-hand side, we can see the age and gender distribution, and you can see that the male patients account for 38%, female accounting for 62%. So it's a ratio of 6 to 4. And if you look at the right-hand side, you can see the fatality rates. So the case fatality rate is 0.7%. So in terms of the fatality rate, male is 1.2% and female is 0.4%. And if you look at those over 80%, it's 6.5%. And next slide. So this is the regional distribution in Korea for COVID-19. And by regions, I told you before about a specific regional and religious cluster called Shincheonji. So this is focused in the Daegu area, which is accounting for 90% of all of the patients. And in particular, Daegu region accounts for 75% of the total. And if you look at the circular graph on the right-hand side, so regardless of the region, the Shincheonji related cases account for 63%. And we have indicated non-Shincheonji, but when we are conducting the epidemiology analysis, there could be possibility of an increase in the number. So next one is the big framework for the response system in Korea. So first of all, for the prevention, so right now we are at the highest alert level, and the Prime Minister is acting as the head of the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters. And we also have the Minister of Health and Welfare participating, and we also have the head of the CDC participating. However, it's not that we are changing the positions. For prevention and safety countermeasures, the head of the CDC has been acting as the director of the headquarters, and the Minister of Health and Welfare is just supporting as the CDC headquarters. So we're just working in cooperation. So next, if you look at the part about risk communication campaign and disclosure information, we are trying to ensure a prompt and transparent sharing of information. And we are also providing services like the call centers for our citizens. And we also have the clinics that are acting as the local screening centers. And we are also holding campaigns. And campaigns are not only emphasizing the importance of rules on personal hygiene, but also about the social distancing. And we are promoting measures as necessary. And lastly, as written in the last bullet point, the government is providing a detailed and clear code of conduct so that the citizens can follow it. So the first countermeasure is as follows. So for COVID-19, in order to prevent further entrance into Korea, as I have said before, we are enforcing entry ban on travelers from Hubei who has been residing there for a certain amount of time. And on February 4th, we also had some entry control being imposed. And on top of that, for patients being hospitalized,
해외 여행 이력을 확인할 수 있는
So we can
소위
actually
DUR이라는
have the
시스템을
DUR
가동해서
system to check
중국,
their travel
일본,
history.
최근에
So we
유행이
are
증가하고 있는
checking
이란,
their
이탈리아를
travel
포함한
from
8개국의
China,
여행력을
Japan,
진료
Iran,
중에 확인할 수
and
있도록 하고
Italy
있습니다.
and other countries. So we are trying to screen those who are
번째로,
coming from 8 countries in total.
조기 발견과
And secondly,
차단을 위해서
in order to
사례가
discover
발생하게
and
되면
prevent the
역학조사를
cases early
실시하고
on, we are
즉각
holding
대응팀이
epidemiological
현장에
investigations when we find cases,
환자의
and
이동
we
경로
are
등에 대해서
actually going there right away
유의한
so
부분을
that we
즉각
can
알리고
monitor
있습니다.
the whereabouts of the
이루어지는
patients and
역학조사는
disclose of it right away.
지난번
And the
2015년
analysis
메르스
that we
사태
do
이후 개정된
at this time has
감염병
been
예방법에
amended
근거해서
after
환자의
the infection law that
신용카드
has
사용,
been
CCTV
imposed
분석,
after the
휴대폰의
MERS
위치 정보
situation
추적 등
previously.
모든
And
정보를
we are
활용해서
also tracking
동선 중에
their
의미
movement
있는
through
부분을
the
공개를 하고
GPS and
그
cell phones and
과정에서
etc. And we are
전파
sharing
우려가 있는
information that are
접촉자를
meaningful.
확인해서
And we are
자가
also
격리시키고
finding
있고
those who they have been in
현장
contact
장소에
with.
대해서는
And for
방역수칙을
those that
실시하고
these
있고
people have been
이러한 모든
contacting,
것들이
then
법에
we are
의해서
also imposing
이루어지고 있으며
self-quarantine.
처벌 조항도
And
있습니다.
this is under a law, and there are also penalties if they
또한
were to violate it.
우리나라는
And furthermore,
곧 다음 슬라이드에서 말씀드리겠습니다.
I will also explain this in later slides. However,
진단 검사를
Korea
대폭
is
확대하여
having early
실시를
screening,
해서
and we have expanded this greatly
환자를
so that
확인하는 데
we can
최선의
confirm the
노력을 기울이고
patients
있습니다.
in the early stages, and we are focusing our efforts here.
또한 이러한
And
유행 시기에
furthermore, in such
우리나라는
a
메르스를
contagious
경험했기
situation, we
의료기관이
have experienced MERS
제대로
situation
기능을
before.
수행해야 한다는
So
중요성을
we
충분히
do
인식하고
fully
있는
understand
상황에서
that medical
발열
centers
또는
should play their
증상을
role
가진
as much as
환자가
possible. So
무분별하게 아무
patients
의료기관에
with fever, we do
내원했을
understand
경우
that they should not
의료기관의
just
기능이
go to
마비될
medical
것을
centers
우려하여
without
전국에 선별
any
진료소를
thoughts.
설치하는
So
등
we have selected
의심되는
and
환자가
established the
적정한
local
곳에서
triage centers
검사를
across
받을 수 있는
Korea
체계를
so that they
가동하고
can
있습니다.
be diagnosed as necessary. And we
선별
have an
진료소 등
appropriate system as
외에도
such.
가거물을 채취해서 검사하는
And
기능으로
in the triage centers, we gain samples to see if they have been infected or not. And as
또
Mr.
방문
Gang-nip
검진
Kim
등을 통해서
has said, we also
가거물을
have
채취해서
drive-thrus,
환자를
mobile
확인하고
facilities,
있습니다.
and door-to-door visits for
또한
collection of these
전국적으로
samples. And across Korea,
혹시라도 지역 전파가 확산돼 있는
if there are any
증거를
regional spread,
조금이라도 빨리 찾기 위해서
in order to
해령이
find
있는 환자에
the
대해서도
proofs of those as soon as
검사를
possible, we are
실시하는
also
감시 체계를
checking
가동하고
patients with pneumonia and
네
having
번째로
the testing for them.
코로나19 환자에 대한
And
치료는
fourth, for the
앞서
treatment of the
말씀드린
COVID-19 patients,
의료기관의 기능 유지가
so
절대적으로
it is really
중요한
important to
상황이기 때문에
maintain the
모든
function
환자가
of the medical
무분별한
centers.
상태로 전달 체계
So
없이
we must
의료기관에
ensure that
입원했을 경우
patients
의료기관의 기능이
do
마비될
not
우려가
go
큽니다.
to all of the medical
따라서
centers without appropriate
환자를
screening
분류를
first.
해서
So in order to ensure
무증상,
that we are
경증,
classifying
중증,
the
위중 등으로
patients by the level of
의료진이
severity
간편하고
of their
빠르게 분류할
illnesses.
수 있는 기준을
So we have set
마련해서
up a
환자를
simple
분류를
criteria so
하고
that we can
적정한
classify them
의료기관으로
quickly
전달
and
체계가
appropriately.
가동되도록 하고
And we are
있습니다.
ensuring that
이
the
과정에서
treatment system
특히
is being improved as such.
음압병상이라든지
And in the
중증 환자가
process,
입원해야 될
if there
병원에
is
대해서는
a requirement for, say,
국가의료의
negative pressure hospital
중추기관인
beds and
국립중앙의료원이
etc., the
전원
National
조정
Medical
센터로서의
Center
역할을
will act
수행을
as the
하고
control
있습니다.
tower to allocate it as necessary.
또한 2009년
And
유행했던
also,
신종플루와 달리 치료제와 백신이
different
현존하지
from
않는
the flu
코로나19
that was
환자에
a trend in
대해서
2009, we don't have the
다목적으로
appropriate
사용되는
vaccines
항바이러스
or
제품이
treatments
사용되고 실험될 수
being
있는
supplied
치료를
at the
구축을
moment.
하여
So we're going
현재
to provide an antivirus
등
that could be
또
effective.
항에볼라
So we have set up a
치료제인
system to distribute
항에볼라
Kaletra
치료제를 비롯한 주요
or
4개 의약품을
other
보유하고 있고
anti-Ebola virus
추가로 수입할
treatment and
예정입니다.
drugs. So we have secured them and we are
이러한
actually
임상적인
planning to
검사,
import more
그리고
if needed.
R&D도
And we are also
준비하고
conducting the
진행하고
clinical
있습니다.
testing and R&D.
다섯 번째로는
And
코로나19가
fifth,
아닌 환자들의
so
진료와
these
관련해서
are about the treatment of
소위
non-COVID-19 patients.
안심병원 체계를 구축하여
So we have
전국의
established the
254개
public relief
안심병원에서
hospital systems. And we have set up 254 public relief hospitals across Korea so that our citizens can visit these hospitals with relief. And we are also categorizing the patients who have respiratory symptoms. And we are separating it out so that these people are not spreading COVID-19 if there are such cases. And we don't have remote medical treatments yet. However, we are using phone calls and we are using other measures so that the patients can receive prescription. And at the same time, we are going to provide the appropriate guidelines so that we can provide concerted efforts for the medical centers. And lastly, it is about the resource support. So we are setting up the life treatment support centers. So we talked about classification of the patients. So for those with minor illnesses, we're going to have them being accepted into the life treatment support centers because we believe that is more effective, and that was the opinion of the experts. So we have secured around 7,400 rooms in dozens of facilities across Korea. And also, the supply and provision of medical teams are also important. So we have actually assigned 750 healthcare workers being dispatched on site. And we are also providing guidelines for personal protective gears. And if they are used, and for the subjects of those that are using it, we have set up a correct criteria.
And moving on to the next slide. The next slide is focused on Daegu and Gyeongbuk province. And as I just reiterate, we are focusing on a religious group which is named as Shincheonji. And patient number 31 has been identified on the 18th of February. And after that, we have witnessed a large cluster infection of the virus. At the same time, in a medical center in Cheongdo called the Daenam Hospital, we have been experiencing and witnessing a cluster outbreak. And related to Shincheonji, it's focused on Daegu. We have received the entire list of Daegu Shincheonji followers, and we have conducted screening, and the similar measures were taken also on the Daenam Hospital at Cheongdo. And in this process, we witnessed and identified the rapid spread of the virus as well as the fatality. And we also conducted our investigations on all of the nationwide medical hospitals focusing on mental illnesses. And in February, we also initiated our social campaign of keeping our social distancing. In this process, we are trying to curb the spread of the COVID-19, which can spread through intimate contacts. And considering the vulnerability of the social medical groups and facilities, we are trying to curb the virus. And as for schools have been they're closed for an extended period of time to prevent the further spread of the virus throughout the society. And I would like to highlight the following three aspects. Regarding the testing and screening, the KCDC, last year in December, we have found a tabletop exercise for the COVID-19, and this has been exercised. And fortunately, that time in China, we have seen an outbreak of a certain type of coronavirus. And then we have conducted on January 11th so that we can establish the pan-coronavirus lab testing. And although the virus has been identified and isolated on January 27th. We have secured bloods and samples. And as you can see here on the slide, you see the second stage. We have the real-time PCR. And on February 4th, this has been available to transfer new technique to 18 local public health labs. This was not only carried out on a public level, but also on a private level, so the scope has been expanded. And moving on to the next slide, we will look at the entire number of laboratory testing. If you look at the very bottom, in Korea, a total of 117 facilities are carrying out real-time RT-PCR, and right now the number of the screening tests are different on a daily basis, but on average, as you can see on the right-hand side upper on the page, we can conduct an over 12,000 and a maximum capacity of 20,000 per day. And the turnaround time for the testing, considering the movement time, we also believe that this can be done by within 6 to 24 hours. About 19,000 cases have been conducted, the testings have been conducted. And next is on the self-treatment and self-treatment application. And if you look at the quarantine, they arrive in Korea and they are quarantined and they are screened. And we also have the special immigration center, which have the installation of the self-diagnostic app. It's in color red. So daily for 2 weeks, 14 days, this person has to go through his or her symptoms and they need to submit the self-diagnostic results for 14 days. If it's not reported for 2 days, then we follow up on that person. And on the next page, you see the captured image of the self-health check mobile app. This has been effective since March 7th. And about 60,000 people have been subject to the mobile application, and this amounts to 84% of those who have flew in to Korea. And for those who do not have the application, we also do the screening process via phone call. About 90% of those who have downloaded the application has been responding back to the system. And through this mobile application, we have identified over 400 cases with symptoms, and among them 87 people had a very meaningful symptoms, and we believe that such mobile application prove the fact that South Korea is trying to have a very flexible and meaningful quarantine for those who are flying into Korea, and this is very different from the entry bans that are put in place. And last but not least, it's about the drive-through screening centers. And these centers are aimed at identifying the patients at an early stage. And we conduct the tests on people. And we do a door-to-door visit. And we also have screening clinics where people come into the clinics. And we also have the drive-through screening clinics where people can drive through their own cars. It's safer and it's more quicker, and about 180,000 cases have been screened, and we believe that drive-through system which was really helpful, and there are about 50 drive-through centers, and it takes about 10 minutes to screen per case. And when you go to a screening clinic, on average, the collection of samples and testing itself takes up to 1 hour, but drive-through clinics, it's faster. It takes only 10 minutes, so you can proceed about 6 tests per hour. So that was it from me. And our headquarters is currently doing our utmost, and regarding Daegu, Gyeongsang, and Cheongdo, we are complying with the standards put forth by HWO. And we are trying to follow and comply with the standards that are put in place by the WHO, and we are trying to exert our full efforts to curb the disease from going on to widespread contagion. Thank you very much. Last but not least, we have Mr. Lee Tae-ho from the second Vice Minister, Foreign Minister.
So please come up to the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My colleagues from the Ministry of Health and Welfare and the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have just provided you with a comprehensive briefing on the current situation of COVID-19 in Korea and the robust and innovative measures we are taking to contain the COVID-19. On my part, I would like to highlight certain notable points of the responses my government is taking, focusing on Korea's external relations with other countries in dealing with this health emergency. Before starting my remarks, I would like to note that many of you present here covered the COVID-19 situation in Korea and provided a fair assessment of the Korean government's responses. I thank you very much for that. As you have just heard, we have mobilized not only our scientific and technological resources, but delved into innovative tools as well. Korea has the best diagnostic capability by far, testing up to 15,000 cases per day, as we have heard. We have been innovative in pioneering tools such as drive-through testing stations and smartphone applications to support our efforts. More importantly, my government has remained in combat with the COVID-19 while trying to avoid interrupting the ordinary daily life of people. We have shared with the public, both domestic and international, information on every development on the situation, as well as every policy direction and actions that my government takes with utmost openness and transparency from the very beginning. This is what Vice Minister Kim called a dynamic response system for open democratic societies. We are firm in our belief that public health challenges can only be overcome with public trust in our efforts, and that public trust can only be earned and harnessed through full openness and transparency. A recent study that analyzed worldwide epidemics since the 1960s came to the conclusion that adopting fact-based policymaking and sharing information with the public is the best strategy. As this is precisely the path my government has taken, there is a deep and wide public confidence in our diagnostic capabilities and quality of health care. This public trust has resulted in a very high level of civic awareness and voluntary cooperation that strengthens our collective efforts to overcome this public health emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, as Vice Minister Kim reiterated, the Korean government is in full cognizance of the importance of our strict adherence to the principles of openness and transparency. This feature of the Korean government's domestic response posture is reflected like a mirror image in its response to Korea's external interactions with other countries during the course of dealing with this health emergency. In this global age, where people travel freely, things move across borders, and we prosper because of it, the consensus among public health professionals seems to be that travel bans are not effective in containing contagious illnesses and can make things worse, even by fueling a sense of complacency. The WHO also repeatedly says, based on past experience and evidence, that restricting the movement of people and goods during public health emergencies is ineffective in most situations and may divert resources from other interventions. The WHO therefore recommends that any measures in relations to international traffic that significantly interfere with the movement of people and goods, during public health emergencies needed to be proportionate to the public health risk and be short in duration and be reconsidered regularly as the situation evolves. The Korean government has taken this path from the very beginning. Despite the public pressures that called for stronger measures to restrict the influx of travelers into Korea, my government has not introduced any entry ban on inbound travelers, except those traveling from only a single most severely affected area in China. By introducing instead the special entry procedure aimed at enhanced health monitoring of travelers coming from certain areas and countries with higher risks, the Korean government was able to avoid an outright entry ban while minimizing the risk of expansion of disease. Maintaining this policy has been, of course, a daunting challenge, but the Korean government is determined to continue to comply with WTO recommendations with full confidence that it is the right way to follow. Despite the WTO's recommendations, travelers leaving from Korea or a certain part of the Korean territory are now facing some form of entry bans from more than 40 countries. I would like to emphasize that any travel restrictions on travelers from Korea should be commensurate with the facts, not based on a vague fear. In this context, please allow me to point out 3 facts here. 1, as Vice Minister Kim said, intensive tests are being undertaken for a certain target group of people in specified regional areas. When you spread the number of this testing to the wide nationwide average, 1 out of every 250 Korean people has been tested. 1 out of every 250 people. Paradoxically, as pointed out earlier, this high number of confirmed cases is the testament of the Korean government's thorough and rapid diagnostic screening. Second, the high level of public trust and civic awareness that has resulted in widespread voluntary self-containment, self-quarantine, and other preventive measures like social distancing is effectively slowing the spread of the outbreak. Third, the possible outflow from Korea of COVID-19 is strictly controlled. Individuals identified as close contacts of confirmed cases are not allowed to go abroad. Also, we are making the Incheon International Airport into a COVID-19 free zone and have made mandatory multi-step fever checks on all outbound passengers. Considering these points and other facts, I believe that the restrictive measures that have been imposed on people traveling from Korea requires careful reconsideration and warrant lifting. I would like to urge once again, by taking advantage of this opportunity, countries imposing restrictions on travelers from Korea to review the facts of the situation in Korea and reconsider their measures. The WHO has shown continued trust in Korea's emergency response capability and its public health measures since the early stages of the outbreak. Recently, both the American and European chambers of commerce have made clear through their press briefings and releases that they are in full support of my government's response efforts and a high degree of transparency with full information disclosure. I sincerely hope that the members of the media present here today will be the eyes and ears of the COVID-19 situation in Korea and look not only at the rising number of the confirmed cases, but also look at what lies behind these numbers. Ladies and gentlemen, With the global spread of the virus seemingly underway, the situation calls for heightened international communication and cooperation in health security. We needed to guard not only against the spread of the virus, but also fear, discrimination, and isolation, all of which may strain our core values of free and open democracy. We all share the grave challenge to contain and control this epidemic and minimize its overreaching impact on our way of lives. In so doing, we hopefully shall not leave lasting scars on the spirit of free trade and movement of people, which is the basis of our shared prosperity. Thank you very much.
So from now on, we will have the Q&A session, and we will actually proceed with the sitting down. So we have many different foreign correspondents from various countries, so we want to ask for your cooperation so that many people can ask questions and get answers. And since we have a lot of foreign correspondents, we want to ask you to limit your questions to 2 questions. And since we have simultaneous translation, please speak a bit slowly and clearly. We also want you to actually designate the person that you're asking to. And when I actually pick someone, then please say your name and position and where you belong to as well. And if you can understand, then we will have 3 people from the right-hand side and 3 people from the left-hand side asking questions. So we have a limited amount of time, and that is why we want to ask for your understanding in proceeding that way. So we will proceed from that side. So 3 people from the right-hand side. And please raise your hands if you are to ask questions. So yes.
Mr. Goddard, German press agency. I have a question to an epidemiologist. I think you are an expert. First, from the beginning, when we look at the beginning of the outbreak, do you think that the South Korean government reacted in a timely and appropriate manner, or did the government learn in the process how to deal with that? And do you think, or do you have an assessment of the dark number undisclosed cases of SARS-CoV-2 viruses infections? Thank you.
So thank you for your question. So I do sort of understand English, but I also am listening to Korean interpretation, so it's a bit confusing. But thank you for your question. So first of all, we do have a lot of government officials and relevant personnel here. So I believe we are trying to convey our message, and you might have an understanding in that regard. And during the presentation, we talked about achieving success. And for that, actually, it is hard for me to agree with that because right now it is at an early stage to evaluate. It is too early right now, not only for Korea, but including all of the other countries. So even for China, can we really say we are controlling the outbreak? I think we are too early to assess it that way. And for the COVID-19, we are still learning. So it's been about 3 months since we started learning. And for that 3 months worth of experience, I believe it is too early to make any sort of an assessment. And what we learned so far is the following. So for this COVID-19, it's a very smart virus. So by being it smart, it's difficult to control. And I believe this is well known to all of you already too, because you have experience from other countries like China already. And as you experienced in other countries, at the early onset of the infection, and when people are not even aware of their symptoms or not having any symptoms at all, being asymptomatic, then even at that stage, they can spread the virus. So because of that, it results in a community level spreading, and it's really difficult to, by principle, control the community outbreak because of that. And that was the situation in Korea and in overall, actually. And if we come back to Korea, at the beginning, we found the 31st patient who was related to the Shincheonji Church of Jesus. And until that time point, we looked into case isolation, contact tracing, and quarantine, and we were pretty successful at that time. However, for the Shincheonji case, it was really difficult to predict by anyone. It could not be predicted. And it was not just because it was a religious group or cluster, but it was actually going away from religion to go into a different sort of a mass gathering. And because of this was too sudden. And even now, we are seeing the consequences of that. And we are trying to limit this as much as possible. So our CDC, together with the medical practitioners and experts, are making all the efforts they can to prevent further spread out from the Daegu city. However, during the process, there were issues, and these issues, if we can share it with the foreign correspondents, we want to. So we see the outbreak happening in other regions like US and Italy, and we believe that if we were to share our information, it could be helpful in actually preventing the further surge of the contagion in other countries. So I want to apologize for not being able to give you too much detail, but in relation to the Shincheonji cases, even if we were to exclude this core cluster related to the Shincheonji case only, even in Korea, there are other community transitions. And among them, a lot of them is really difficult for us to figure out the epidemiological link. So when we say that, I believe that we are beyond being the containment control stage. So that is why we are at the mitigation stage right now. And at this stage, what is really important is the following. So we have to minimize the health damage to the patients. And in order to do so, we have to secure the necessary medical supplies. And I believe that is really important. However, we saw such a dramatic surge in the Daegu city, and because of that, during the process of getting these medical provisions, there were a lot of difficulties. And in that sense, I believe that we saw a result of death cases that we could have avoided if we had made the right provisions. And we also have the long-term care facilities and the nursing facilities. For facilities like them, if we were to look at the medical care centers as those, these are not really just general hospitals. It was more like nursing homes. So these facilities had a lot of the elderly patients. And in these facilities, we saw a lot of fatalities. And also, in more than 10 of these centers, we are seeing more fatalities. And here is really difficult to contain. And that was one of the lessons that we learned. And through these cases, we believe that we could also see other cases happening in other countries of the outbreak in these long-term care facilities. So we believe that these countries will have to set appropriate measures that are in line with their country. And also, when we talk about mitigation and when we talk about contact tracing, it's really difficult when we don't know the sources. So there are cases where we cannot do the tracing. It's not that we're not doing it, it's just that we cannot. And that's why we are trying to mitigate with efforts like social distancing, and we are making efforts. But in China, there were radical measures like the lockdown of the Hubei and Wuhan province, but in a democratic society, that is difficult to do. So that is why we are trying to make recommendation and to promote civic awareness and voluntary efforts of the citizens. However, it is really difficult. And because of that, for those countries that are at the early stage of the outbreak, we want to urge them to actually communicate very widely with the local communities so that you can prepare for it ahead of time. So you have to start these communications now. So that is still a challenging issue and challenging task for Korea. And it is still coming to us in that manner. So that's my opinion. And of course, I have more to say, but I am not the only person working on this, so I will end here. Thank you.
마이크를 사용해 주시기 바랍니다.
So would you be able to use the mic?
그러니까 저희가 지금 아까 이제 저희 그 정부 고위 관계자분들도 다 말씀하셨지만
some of our government officials also talked about this.
처음서부터
And from the start, from the containment phase, and as we went to the outbreak with the 신천지 cases and in core clusters, even during these processes, we tried to isolate the patients with the confirmed cases, and that we aggressively went into the containment phase. And even for the 신천지 followers without any symptoms, we screened them all as well. And among them, we found a lot of patients among these followers. And there were even patients without symptoms, and we found all of them as well. And in the numbers that we confirmed, in Korea, well, let's say in China or in Japan or for other countries, when we compare their cases to Korea, I believe that case finding is very successful. And because of that, we have patients who don't have any symptoms or who have mild symptoms, and they all become a part of the denominator. And because of that, we see an expansion of the denominator. And because of that, we see the fatality rate seemingly decreasing. However, for the fatality rates, I don't think this can be a comparative metric in looking at the success of CDC's measures. However, as you asked, are there any non-disclosed cases where we could not find them? I don't think so. I believe that maybe those people could be, but we have found almost all, because we found even those without symptoms or those with minor symptoms. So I believe that we were finding almost all. And if we find more data countrywide, I believe that it could be really helpful for other countries in establishing their own preventive measures. So we will get the next question. So I want to apologize, but I want to ask you to keep your question short and explanation short as well, because we are limiting our Q&A session to around 1 more hour. And we want to give more opportunities to other foreign correspondents. So from my hand side, left-hand side, we will get 2 more people. So could you please raise your hand? Okay, we'll go in that order.
Hello, this question is for the director of the KCDC. How do you ensure that the personal information of the patients, which you are publicly detailing, travel routes, for example, how do you ensure that their privacy is respected?
As I mentioned before, as I explained in my presentation, in year 2015, we went through the MERS, and the National Assembly passed the Contagious Disease Act, and the information related to this is disclosed and is part of the reliability and duty of the Ministry of Health and Welfare. And we disclose the information because we believe that we need to check the movement traces of the high-risk group, so that other people could identify and acknowledge that they could be potential confirmed cases. And we believe that this could decrease the further spread of the virus on a community level. And of course, there could be controversies over privacy of individuals, but as you all know already, we believe that we need to abide by the laws that have been passed, and this is being according to our measures. And we use CCTV surveillance camera footages and credit card records, and we utilize them for movement tracing. And we believe that at an early stage, as Mr. Kim has said, during the containment phase, these information are very crucial and significant. And they were very helpful in identifying the confirmed cases. However, as the spread of the COVID-19 outbreak, if we go into the analysis afterwards, if the community transmission is spread to a wider extent, we believe that disclosure of information could be less relevant. So maybe these could be the subject of a review on a later level. And next, on the second row.
Thank you. I'm Andres Sanchez from the Spanish news agency. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Kwon from the KCDC. The first would be if there's any figure as of today of more or less the number of patients awaiting to be hospitalized in Daegu and Gyeongbuk. And also I'd like to know if the ministry right now has any assessment on, let's say, the level of hospital saturation in this particular region. Thank you.
지금 현재 대구 경북의
So as of
경우
now, for
앞서
Daegu
말씀드린
and the
그 환자
Gyeongbuk
분류에
province
따라서
region,
생활치료
as I
시설도 계속
told you
확장을 하고
before,
있고
based on the classification of the
대구뿐만
patients, we
아니라
are expanding the
전국의
number of the life
국립중앙의료원이
treatment
전원
centers.
조정 지원 센터로서
And
역할을
also
하면서
not only in
이번
Daegu,
격리병상을
but
다 활용을
the
하는
National
체계를
Medical
가동을
Center
했는데
is acting as a
그러한
control tower
준비하는데
to
시간이
secure
저희가
more
좀 부족한 것은
hospital beds.
사실이었고
However, it was
의외로
true that we had a shortage of
큰
time
신천지
in
상황이
preparing it
발생한
in
것이
full.
전혀 예측하지
And
못했던
the
상황이었기
Shincheonji
때문에
situation was something that could not be predicted, and there was some confusion because of that. And so for those awaiting to be hospitalized, it was more than around 2,000 yesterday, although it is decreasing. And there are some people who should go to the life treatment centers because they have minor illnesses. And for those with severe illnesses, we are trying to prioritize their hospitalization. And for the saturation of the hospitals, when we were to classify the patients depending on the level of the illnesses, so for those people who are severely ill, then they should be going to the negative pressure rooms. And I believe that we have secured the necessary amount in the hospitals. And with regards to the saturation state, we have been able to thoroughly take measures for it. And also for this case of the cluster outbreak, there has been cases in Japan in the cruise ships and also in US in cruise ships as well. However, for the Shincheonji case, it's even more difficult because in cruise ships, you can sort of identify the high-risk groups because you have the identity of those who are boarding on the cruise ships, and even they had difficulties in identifying the patients. However, for the Shincheonji case is much larger and it's not in a limited region. It's more of the local community where we saw such an outbreak. That's why it took more time to analyze it. And so for this specific case in Korea, maybe it could be a lesson that could be learned from other countries when such a case occurs in other countries as well. And whichever country it be, countries don't have full provisions to actually hospitalize all of the patients. So in Korea, we have secured probably the largest number of the negative pressure hospital beds, but we still face difficulties, and that would be my answer. So we will get answers from the right-hand side now. So we have 4 people putting up their hands. So we will go in this order, and maybe you could ask in the next opportunity. So person in red. So hello, I am Kim Young-eun from BBC Korea. So first of all, I want to ask Mr. Dong-hyun Kim. So you have said that 80% is coming from the group outbreak or the cluster outbreak. So in order to prevent and contain that, what would be the core factor? I believe other countries would also be curious about this. So what is the core factor in preventing group outbreak or cluster outbreak? And also to Yeonjae Kim, so there was a difference in the fatality rate of female patients versus male patients. So is there a meaningful reason for this?
네, 그 말씀하신 집단 감염이라고
So for
하는 게
the
이제
cluster
여러 가지
outbreak,
이렇게 뭐 친천지
so
교처럼
such a case was related to the Shincheonji case, so it was due to such a mass religious gathering. So it could be like that, or it could be in other group facilities like the nursing homes where we see such cases. So I don't think we have a key core solution to it.
소셜 디스턴싱 차원에서
So
그와 같은
from the
매스
social
게더링을 이제
distancing
전면적으로 하지
perspective,
않도록
we
노력을 해야 되고요.
just have to
근데
make
이제
efforts to actually refrain from having more mass gatherings.
지자체에서 강하게 권고하고
And
있는데도
the
아직까지
governments
일부
and municipal governments
정부
are
기관을
actually
중심으로
making
해서 그와
strong
같은 그
recommendations.
종교
However, despite all that,
모임들이
there
이제
are
진행되고
still
있는
some mass
상황이고요.
religious gatherings
그다음에 이제
happening across Korea.
한편으로는 정말 어려운
And on one side,
과제가
one of the really
조금 전에
difficult tasks would be the
말씀드렸다시피
following. So as we said before, so cases happening in long-term care facilities like the nursing homes, and also the infections within hospitals. So for hospitals, so for those with respiratory symptoms, we are setting up a separate route for a separate treatment and diagnosis. But this time, I think there was a Bundang Seoul National University Hospital. There was a case that was really difficult there. And also for the long-term care facilities and hospitals, I think we could manage them in two cases in large. So first, so for hospitals with more of the pneumonia patients or for those with other high-risk chronic illnesses, maybe we can transfer them to a different facility because they are in a difficult situation. So maybe we can actually transfer them to a smaller hospitals, or we can have a lockdown of the long-term care facilities. So maybe we have to lock them down so that even the medical practitioners and the healthcare workers do not come out of those facilities. However, practically it is very difficult in reality.
And regarding the patients who are increasing here in Korea, we have seen fatalities and an increase in the number of those with severe symptoms. And as what we have identified for those with a high rate of severity, those are those who are in the older age group and those with chronic underlying illnesses. And by gender, we have not yet able to identify the difference because we do not have a large group of number of fatalities or those with severe symptoms. But we believe that the data are very similar with those of China. The fatalities are leading as for those people with underlying chronic illnesses. And next.
Andrew Salmon, Asia Times. My question's for Mr. Kim on the left or the gentleman on the right, please. You've got a very, very high infection rate, but a very, very low fatality rate here in Korea. Could you speculate on why that may be? And could you possibly address, is this due to the young age of the Shincheonji members? Are you testing a lot of false positives? Are you anticipating a surge in your death rate? Is it due to you've got very good care and treatment, or is it sort of even the kimchi theory that Koreans eat a lot of garlic and immune system boosting foods? Why the low death rate despite the high infection rate? Thank you.
We believe that, and this could be my personal opinion, but I believe that in Korea, in the early stage when the patients were hospitalized, when they had symptoms and when they were hospitalized, the time frame was very short. So there were many cases when they have been hospitalized with just minor symptoms. And looking at the demographics in China, there have been an increase of the patients who were in the young age group. And however, as Mr. Kim has explained earlier, we believe that we are witnessing a spread of the virus among those with chronic illnesses who are staying at nursing homes. And I believe that we do have a possibility of a potential increase of death rate. But right now, as of now, we believe that we have been identifying the cases at an early stage and providing appropriate treatment. And just to add on, right now, looking at the case fatality rate right now, we cannot assess whether it's high or short. I believe that it's not appropriate index as of now. And as we said earlier before, looking at the demographics of those who have been confirmed, we see a large number of those in the age group of 20 to 30s because the followers of Shincheonji were very young. And among these group, as they were in our denominator, I believe that they led to a lower fatality rate. And therefore, in order to have a correct and accurate assessment, we need to identify and assess and analyze by age group rather than the overall people. But despite all this fact, we are witnessing a fatality rate of fatalities among those who are in the 70s and 80s. But the fatality rate is lower than those of Italy, Iran, or China. And I believe these were possible because we have early detection. And that is what I believe. And maybe those without symptoms have been identified and they have been included in the denominators. So, but on the other hand, I believe that because of a sudden increase of the patients, and especially those in the long-term health facilities like the nursing homes, we believe that we could have reduced the death toll, which were avoidable. So I have that sense of feeling. And we will take the third question from the right-hand side. Yes, please.
So hello, I am Jung-mi Cha from Reuters. So first question is towards Mr. Kwon. So in Korea, we are doing the epidemiology analysis and we are actually disclosing that including the moving routes of the patients. So for the cohort quarantine, I understand it for hospitals because you have patients. But when you have the cohort quarantine of a total building of an apartment, isn't that infringing on the human rights? So what is the balance there? And also, my next question, so compared to Italy, Korea made some maybe good preemptive measures. So what is a preemptive measure that Korea did better compared to Italy? So with regard to the first question, so in order to prevent the outbreak of infection, we have to prevent the external effects. So it's also for vaccines and for contagious infections. Isolation rooms all have good feasible proofs of it based on the health and welfare. So for the Daegu City apartment, it had a lot of the Shincheonji followers. And we saw a sudden surge in the number of patients there. And that's why we went through a cohort quarantine of that facility or residential area. So that was to prevent further outbreak from that region. So that was to make sure that they are under self-quarantine by preventing further outbreak. So it has actually justifiable grounds based on our analysis. So it has grounds and it should have grounds and it should be based on theory. And in this region, we saw a great number of patients and there was a possibility that more patients could come out of it. That is why such measures were taken. And with regards to the testing, as Mr. Kwon mentioned, so we were able to get our lessons from the MERS case in the past. So when we have such a infection, one way to respond to it is through testing. So during the MERS situation, what we learned was that it should not only be led by the government, but we have to cooperate it with the civic groups, and that is why we gained support from other facilities as well. So this time around, we not only got help from the CDC, but we also got cooperation from the medical teams and the medical associations. So we saw a participation of a large number of the medical experts. And we were also able to evaluate together with the private groups so that we could assess the diagnosis kits very quickly. And we were able to distribute it quickly so that we could not have any negative voices coming out of the criteria of these diagnostic tests. And we had the experts assessing the results. And if we don't have the invalid results, then we sent it to the CDC so we could get another case of results. And I think this cooperation between the government and private sector was the best way to make sure that we could have a quick diagnosis.
네, 이제는 질문을
Okay, so that's where we will cut in for that joint press briefing by government and local health officials on the coronavirus situation in Korea, and most importantly, the countermeasures that are being taken place. Just to summarize on some of the main points mentioned in that briefing, it was pretty much three main categories: the overall trend in terms of the stats and the figures regarding the virus, also, as I mentioned, the countermeasures that they are taking place, as well as matters relating to the diplomatic front. In terms of the numbers, just to recap, 7,400 nearly cases, 51 deaths, 166 people have been released from hospital. In terms of the measures, two core values, the public participation secured through openness and transparency, as well as respecting creative solutions and developing high-tech countermeasures, such as these drive-through testing facilities. And we will have to end it there. 5 p.m. news with Devin Whiting is coming up in just a moment, so thank you for tuning in.